This video is going to step you through the fourth material found in your Unreal Engine 4 Shaders and Effects Cookbook for Chapter 5. We're going to create an outline or like a highlight around an object in our game that you could use later on um, if with a blueprint system to kind of indicate that an item is selected or highlighted for interactability. But we're just going to focus on getting just the outline working. So the first thing, make sure that you are working in the correct map, and it should just be this Christmas tree sitting on a shelf with all that stuff on there. And we are going to create our material first. So we're going to right click and create a material that I'm going to call M underscore edge outline. And inside of it, we need to make a quick change to here, since we are going to handle this with our post-processing. So we need to come over to our details panel, and where it says material domain, it's not going to be the surface of our object. We need to change this to post-process because it's going to be, that's what's going to handle this. The other thing we need to change is we need to scroll all the way down to post-processing material and change the blendable location from after tone mapping to before tone mapping in order for this to work correctly. So let's start to build this out a little bit. It's going to be a little bit larger than some of the other ones that we've worked with. We're going to have to use a little bit of math to find our edges. But the nice thing about this is if you understand how it works, you could use this in a lot of situations to find edges of things. For instance, it might be an interesting thing to play around with if you want to make something like a toon shader. This might be a place to begin with that. So we are going to create 4 vector 2s. So I'm going to hold down the 2 key and click 4 times. 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to set the first one to -1, 0. The next one's going to be 1, 0. The third one is going to be 0, -1. And the last one will be 0, 1. And we're going to use these as a way to take a look. We're going to look at pixels in our post-processing. And we're going to use these in order to build a matrix where we're going to look above a specific pixel, below, to the left, and to the right to determine if we have found the edge of our object in our scene. So we're going to save this for now, and we're going to work with a material function so that we can kind of contain a bunch of material stuff that we're going to need to use in all 4 places here, so that we don't have to kind of clutter up the space too much. So I'm going to go back to the content browser. I'm going to right click, and underneath materials and textures, I'm going to choose material function right here. And I'm going to rename this MF underscore pixel depth calculator. And the thing that this is going to do is it's going to determine our pixel on the screen, how far into the scene is it, so that we'll be able to use this with that up, down, left, right, where we can see if if something is dramatically different, we've probably hit an edge, so we can easily find the edges of our object. Alright, so once we have this open, you can kind of ignore this. We don't really care about that error, so don't worry too much about it. We are going to come over to our inside of here, and we are going to add a function input. So I'm going to right click, type function input, and choose that one. We don't need a vector 3 function input, we only need a vector 2. So we are going to change the input type to a vector2. We can also name this, rather than in, that doesn't really help us, we could change it to something like offset. Since we're going to be using this to look up, down, left, right, it makes a lot more sense, because we're going to be feeding in like that 0, 1, 0, -1, etc., into here. So the last thing we do need to change in our input offset here is going to be to check on this use preview value as default. So don't forget to do that. All right, so let's kind of build this out a little bit. The first thing we're going to do is, I'm going to space this out a little bit nicer. I'm going to need a little bit of room, is I'm going to add a multiply node. So hold M and click, and feed this into the B. We then need to add a scene texel size node to here, so I'm going to right click and start typing that in. And what this is going to do is this is going to make sure that no matter what device our game is working on, that this is still going to work, because if you work with different devices, the pixels could be different. It could really affect this. So this is going to kind of basically even it out so that everything is accurate no matter what type of screen you're working with. So we also need to add a texture coordinate node up here. So that we can get our texture coordinate of what we're looking at. And we are going to feed this into an add. So texture coordinate goes into A, this multiply goes into B. The last thing is we do need to add a scene depth so that we can actually see how deep that specific coordinate, that offset is in our scene, so we can get that information. And then we are done with this. So it's a lot easier to kind of set this up here rather than having to do this multiple times back in our other material. So we are going to save this all out and go back to our M edge outline. So let's see, we got our 4 vector 2s over here. What we need to add now is a reference to that MF depth calculator. So I'm going to right click and find a material function call node. Select that. And I can choose what material function from here, or I can drag it from here if I want to make sure I get the right one. But this will then be referenced to that. So we can feed in that vector 2, which is going to be this stuff. Sort of, eventually we're going to get there. And then we can get the result of all of those calculations, so we can get the depth out of there. So we're going to need this actually 5 times. So I'm going to kind of space this out a little bit even, because we're going to need a little bit of room here. This is gonna, like I said, it's going to be kind of a big one. We're going to put it here. Control C, Control V. Paste it in again. Paste it in again. And we're going to need a 5th one down here. The next step is we are going to need to, let's see, we are going to need a scalar parameter to control for the width of our line that we want to draw around everything. So I'm going to put one down. And for now, I'm just going to set it to 5. But let me name this line width in case I do want to come back and make an adjustment to this. But 5 should work pretty good. All right, so we got our coordinates, we got how fat we want the line. We do need to multiply these together. So I'm going to make 4 multiply nodes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we have the joy of hooking these all up. So the way that these hook up is these vector 2's go in A, the line width goes in B through all of them. This down here, this might work a little bit nicer. And then the result of this gets fed into that pixel depth calculator. And we ignore that last one for now. All right, so this is going to help us with being able to look, again, up, down, left, right from our central pixel to see if we've reached an edge. So the next stage is we are going to have to combine these all together to see the results of some math is going to be done to see the results of, like, if something gets spit out, what is this equal to, and that will determine if we're on an edge or not. So we're going to end up adding 4 adds. So I'm just going to hold down A. I need one here, one here, a third one here. Kind of move this over, and one right here. So we're going to add the result of this one and this one. We're going to add the result of this one and this one. Then we're going to add those adds together. And we still need to handle this one down here, which is going to, we're going to use a multiply on this one before we put this in. So I'm going to hold down M, feed this into here, and we are going to create a constant. So I'm going to hold down 1 and click of a depth of -4. Let's see. Okay. And we will kind of play around with some of these numbers, and you're going to see how things work once we kind of get this working. It'll be pretty cool. So this last add, we just feed this add into here, and we feed this multiply into here. After this add, we need to add an absolute node, which is just an ABS, so that we get a positive number. Even if it ends up being negative, we still want a positive number being spit out. We don't want to deal with negatives. It'll make our life a lot easier. Let's see. So now that we have our little edge selection, our edge finding thing coded over here, we need to actually do something with that. So, like, what do we do if we have an edge? We need to do one thing. If we don't have an edge, we need to do something else. So we're going to actually use an if statement. I'm going to right click and type if, and we're going to feed this abs into here. And we are going to add another scalar parameter called threshold, and feed this into B. And we're going to set this one to 4. We're going to come back later once we get this hooked up, and we're going to manipulate some of these constants so that you can see what happens if we make adjustments to them. All right, so now we need to tell what happens if we have, if absolute is bigger or absolute is less. So I'm going to make 2 constants. The first one is going to be set to 1, and this one's going to be set to 0. So if our absolute value is greater than our threshold, we're going to give it a value of 1. If our absolute value is less than our threshold, we're going to give it a value of 0. And this is going to go then pixel by pixel and determine what happens. So let's hook this up to our emissive color. And we should see something like this. So it's finding the edge of that sphere. So that's pretty cool. I could even change it to our cube. And it kind of finds the edges of things. What about the teapot? Oops, I guess we can't do that one. Okay, we could do the cylinder. So in essence, we're almost making like a toon shader. Alright, so let's apply and save this. And let's set this up so that it works in our post-processing volume. So let's go and find our post-processing volume right here. And then in the details, we're going to have to locate the rendering feature, which, let's see if I can find this. There it is. And we're looking for this post-process material right here. Since that's what we're doing, we're making a post-process material. So I'm going to click this plus to add one. And I'm going to drag this M edge outline material. Let's see. I'm sorry, we have to do asset reference first. So hit the plus, choose asset reference, and then we can drop that M edge outline. And it should instantly start working. So if you are not having it work, I would go back and double check. But we get stuff like this. If we move in and out, you can see how it changes. So we can kind of fiddle around with a few numbers to see what they do. So the first one I want to play with, let's see if I can get this kind of on the over here, squish this up a little bit, is I want to go back and mess with this -4. So what happens if we do -4? What if we change it to something like -10? It's going to probably be a little bit too much. Let's try -1. So not really a number we can really mess around with. So this one does need to stay at -4. Let's go up to this threshold though and see what happens when we make a change to this. So the default value is 4. What if we jump this one up to 10? We can see that a lot more got cut out. So like if we move in closer, those little tiny bits don't get caught at that because our threshold is a lot bigger. What if we dropped it down to something like a 1? We get a lot more that it's doing the outline on. So pretty neat. I'm going to set this back to 4 though. Let's just, for fun, see what happens if we switch these. What happens if we set this to 0 and this to 1? We get the opposite effect, and it does start to kind of look a little bit more like you would think that this would be moving more towards something like a toon shader, but we honestly don't want it this way. But you know, it is kind of fun. Maybe you did want kind of an effect like this. But what we're actually kind of doing with this is we're going to be using this as a mask ultimately, so that where it's white, we're going to draw an outline, and where it's black, we're not going to draw an outline. So we can use this as a mask in the next step. we go. So let's get a nice pink highlight kind of going on here. I'm going to go back into my M edge outline, and let me make some room. We're gonna build some stuff up here. So we want to use this ultimately as a mask. So we are going to create a lerp, and this if statement is going to get fed in as the alpha. So let's feed this out, at least for now, into here. So we want to lerp together. We want to get the text, of what it's supposed to look like in the scene, and then we want to give it a color. So I'm going to make a vector parameter. And this is just going to be called outline color. I'm going to give it the color I want, so like a hot pink. And I do need to turn this into a make float 4. So I'm going to, as it won't work as is, we have to make it into a float. So make float 4. And all the RGBA is going to get fed into here. So R goes into this one, G goes into this one, B goes into here, and A goes, oops, sorry about that. A goes into the last one, just to get this into the correct format. All right, so we want this to be kind of glowing, so we're going to need to add a multiply node into here. I always keep doing that, come on. And we need to make a scalar parameter so that we can adjust the intensity of this if we want to. So let's do scalar parameter. I'm going to call it outline intensity because that's what it is. And feed it into here. So probably something like a 5 will work really well for this. And we will put this into there, and we are going to feed this into our B, since this is what's going to go on top, because remember the B is what's on top. So we can see that we are getting our pink on our outline, but we can't see the background quite yet. So in order to get the background, we're going to need to get a scene texture node. So make sure I'm going to call it correctly. Yep, create a scene texture node. So I'm just going to right click scene texture, and it's just this one. This one right here, texture scene texture. And we want to set this up, that color into this lerp. But we need to come over to here, and where it says the scene texture ID, we're not getting the scene color. We need to get that post-process input. There we go. And let's apply and save it. And now we're getting our stuff through there. So we're getting kind of like our outline, but we're getting the highlight. And the reason this is working is because we are using that edge finder as our mask in that lerp. So last stage, we probably want to set it up. You know, it's kind of cool to have it on everything, but what if we want to set it up so that it's only on an individual item of our, so possibly something that's selected or not, is we have to kind of tell it that only work on a specific object. So we're going to create a new lerp in order to do that. So I'm going to click lerp, and we are going to feed this lerp into B, because remember that's actually our outline. It's going to be like our outline and all that stuff. So and this is going to get fed into here. So we're going to make a copy of this scene texture, copy and paste, and feed this into our A. So the next thing we're going to need to do is we do need to make our alpha in order for this to work. So we're going to set this up. We need to utilize the scene texture, but we're going to have to make a copy of it, copy paste, but we have to make one tweak to this. We need to change the scene texture ID from post-process input to custom depth. And this change is going to allow us to select a specific object in our scene to give it that custom depth rendering so that it will only render this around that specific item. So we are going to create a multiply. And we are going to connect this up to here. And the B value is going to be set something pretty low. We're going to set it equal to a 0.01. We're then going to connect this up to a frac node. So just right click and type frac. Since this is probably going to be a really low number that we wouldn't be able to normally utilize. And then, because we don't want it rounding up to 0 by accident, so that we're going to now connect this into the alpha. So let's apply and save, and it's going to look like it's not doing anything. Because what we need to do is we need to tell it what object this should be applied to. So I'm going to select this Christmas tree, and I'm going to find the underneath details. We need to do our rendering details on here. So let's see. There's the rendering. And we are looking for, let's see if I can find it. Render custom depth pass. I'm going to click that on. And notice now it's just highlighting our tree. So, you know, if you did want to kind of control this with a blueprint, like you could take this and control it. This is the thing that you'd want to toggle where like, oh, this is the selected, like if something happens, this gets selected. Okay, this gets selected now. This gets selected. It's kind of a fun little thing. So let me turn that back on. And I know this was a really large one. But if you go step by step, get it working in steps, you should be able to be successful with this one. I do recommend going and reading the end of the book, where it explains exactly how it works. It talks about the pixel matrix and what it is doing. You know, this is just the walkthrough and how to get it set up. I try to explain as best as I can if we're just, you know, looking up, down, left, right. But it does kind of go into more depth of how that edge works.